July 30th, 1975. The day America's most powerful union boss vanished into thin air. July 30th, 1975, 2:15 p.m. Jimmy Hoffa stood outside the Machus Red Fox restaurant in Detroit, Michigan. He was supposed to meet two people, Anthony Tony Provenzano, a New Jersey Teamster official with ties to the Genovese crime family, and Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, a Detroit mobster. Hoffa had been waiting for 30 minutes. Nobody showed up. He walked to a payphone and called his wife, Josephine. "Joe, it's me. I'm at the restaurant. Nobody's here. I think I've been stood up." Josephine was worried. "Jimmy, come home. Something doesn't feel right." "I'll give it a few more minutes. If they don't show, I'm leaving." That was the last time anyone heard from Jimmy Hoffa. By 3:30 p.m., Jimmy Hoffa had disappeared. No body, no witnesses, no trace. Just gone. The FBI would spend the next 47 years searching for him. They'd dig up fields, demolish buildings, drain lakes, interview thousands of witnesses, and they'd find nothing. But here's what nobody talks about. Jimmy Hoffa knew he was going to disappear. 3 weeks before he vanished, Hoffa had a conversation with his lawyer, Frank Regano. They were sitting in Hoffa's home office in Detroit, and Hoffa said something chilling. "Frank, if something happens to me, you need to know the truth. I'm not the target. I'm the insurance policy." Regano didn't understand. "What are you talking about, Jimmy?" Hoffa leaned forward. "I know where the bodies are buried, not just mine, all of them. The Teamsters pension fund, the mob loans, the politicians we bought, the judges we owned, the elections we rigged. I know everything. So as long as I keep my mouth shut, I'm valuable. But the moment I start talking, I'm dead. And Frank, I'm thinking about talking." Regano's face went pale. "Jimmy, don't. They'll kill you." Hoffa smiled. "They can try. But here's the thing, Frank. I've been preparing for this for 20 years. I've got documentation, proof, evidence, everything the FBI would need to take down the entire operation. And I've hidden it somewhere nobody will ever find it." "Where?" "That's the point, Frank. Nobody knows. Not you, not my wife, not my kids. Nobody. And if they kill me, that information stays hidden. But if they let me live, if they let me back into the Teamsters, I keep quiet. It's simple. I'm too dangerous to kill." Regano stared at Hoffa. "You're playing a dangerous game, Jimmy." "I've been playing dangerous games my whole life. This is just the final round. If you're already hooked, you need to hear what happened next. Because Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance wasn't random. It was planned. And the reason why will blow your mind. Here's what most people don't know about Jimmy Hoffa. Before he was a union boss, before he controlled billions, before he made the mob kneel, Jimmy Hoffa was a street fighter. Literally. 1927, Jimmy was 14 years old, working at a Detroit grocery warehouse for 32 cents an hour. One day, the foreman tried to dock his pay for taking a bathroom break. Jimmy didn't argue. He didn't complain. He punched the foreman in the face, knocked him cold, got fired on the spot. But here's what happened next. The other workers walked out with Jimmy, all 40 of them. They refused to work until the foreman was fired, and Jimmy was rehired with an apology. Management caved in 3 days. That's when Jimmy learned the most important lesson of his life. One man with courage can move a crowd, but a crowd with organization can move the world. By 1932, Jimmy had joined the Teamsters. By 1957, he was president. 1.7 million members, the largest, most powerful labor union in America. But here's the part that made Jimmy different from every other union boss. He remembered what it felt like to be powerless. When Teamster truck drivers went on strike, Jimmy didn't stay in his office. He walked the picket lines. When management brought in strikebreakers, Jimmy didn't hire security. He fought them himself. Broken ribs, black eyes, split knuckles. Jimmy wore his scars like medals. The workers loved him because Jimmy wasn't pretending. He was one of them. But that loyalty came with a price. To keep the Teamsters strong, Jimmy needed money. Lots of it. And banks wouldn't lend to unions. So Jimmy made a decision that would eventually kill him. He went to the mob. Subscribe right now, because what Jimmy did next changed organized crime in America forever. 1959, Las Vegas was exploding. Casinos were being built on every corner. But there was a problem. The mob wanted to build casinos, but banks wouldn't loan them money. Mobsters didn't have credit. They didn't have collateral. They had nothing but cash and connections. So they came to Jimmy Hoffa. The Teamsters pension fund was worth $2 billion. Jimmy controlled it. And Jimmy realized something brilliant. He could loan mob money to build casinos and make the Teamsters even richer. So that's exactly what he did. Jimmy loaned millions to mob-connected developers. They built the Stardust, the Fremont, the Desert Inn. The mob made fortunes. The Teamsters made interest. Everybody won, except this partnership came with hidden costs. The mob helped Jimmy rig Teamster elections. They intimidated rivals. They silenced opposition. They made problems disappear. And Jimmy kept detailed records of everything, every loan, every bribe, every favor, every politician the mob bought, every judge they owned. Jimmy Hoffa was building an insurance policy because Jimmy knew that one day the mob might try to kill him. And when that day came, he needed leverage. But in 1957, someone noticed what Jimmy was doing, a young lawyer named Bobby Kennedy. And Bobby Kennedy hated everything Jimmy Hoffa represented. Bobby Kennedy versus Jimmy Hoffa wasn't just a legal battle. It was personal. Bobby was a millionaire's son, went to Harvard, never worked a real job in his life, grew up with servants and country clubs and dinner parties with senators. Jimmy was a high school dropout, grew up in poverty, fought for everything he ever had. Bobby thought Jimmy was a thug who corrupted unions and betrayed workers. Jimmy thought Bobby was a spoiled rich kid playing hero. When Bobby became chief counsel for the Senate's McClellan Committee in 1957, he called Jimmy to testify about Teamster corruption. The two men sat across from each other in a Senate hearing room, and the hatred was palpable. Bobby asked about mob connections. Jimmy took the Fifth Amendment. Bobby asked about pension fund loans. Jimmy took the Fifth. Bobby asked about violence against rival union organizers. Jimmy took the Fifth, 117 times. Jimmy Hoffa invoked his Fifth Amendment right 117 times. Bobby was humiliated. Jimmy was defiant, and then Bobby leaned forward and said something that would haunt Jimmy for the rest of his life. Mr. Hoffa, I'm going to put you in prison. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care what it costs. You're going to prison. Jimmy smiled. Good luck with that, kid. But Bobby wasn't bluffing. When JFK became president in 1961, Bobby became Attorney General, and Bobby used every resource of the Justice Department to destroy Jimmy Hoffa. Wiretaps, surveillance, raids, undercover agents. Bobby spent millions of taxpayer dollars hunting Jimmy, and in 1964, Bobby finally got him. Jury tampering fraud, 13 years in federal prison. Jimmy went to prison in 1967, but before he left, he made a decision that would seal his fate. He appointed Frank Fitzsimmons as acting president of the Teamsters. Jimmy thought Frank would keep the seat warm until he got out. Jimmy didn't realize Frank was planning to steal his throne. Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. 4 years. Prisoner 33298NE. While Jimmy sat in prison, Frank Fitzsimmons discovered something. Being president of the Teamsters was better than being Jimmy's number 2. Frank liked the power, liked the money, liked making decisions without Jimmy breathing down his neck. And the mob? The mob loved Frank. Frank was weak, malleable, easy to control. He signed whatever loan papers they put in front of him, asked no questions, made no demands. Jimmy Hoffa, on the other hand, was strong-willed, stubborn, unpredictable. Jimmy asked questions. Jimmy wanted his cut. Jimmy was harder to manipulate. So the mob made a choice. Frank stays. Jimmy goes. December 23, 1971. President Richard Nixon commuted Jimmy's sentence. But there was a condition buried in the paperwork. Jimmy was banned from union activities until 1980. Jimmy knew exactly what had happened. Frank had lobbied Nixon. The mob had pressured Nixon. They wanted Jimmy neutered. When Jimmy walked out of prison, he called Frank. "Frank, I'm out. Time to step down." Frank's response was ice cold. "I'm not stepping down, Jimmy. I'm the president now. You had your time. It's over." Jimmy hung up the phone and said one word: war. For the next 3 years, Jimmy fought to get back into the Teamsters. He hired lawyers to challenge the restriction. He rallied supporters. He prepared for the 1976 election, and the polls showed Jimmy would win. Teamster members still loved him. Frank Fitzsimmons was weak, and everybody knew it. But the mob couldn't let Jimmy win, because if Jimmy became president again, he'd have access to all the records, all the loans, all the evidence. And Jimmy had already told people he was thinking about talking to the FBI, so the mob made the only decision they could make. July 30th, 1975, 11 a.m. Tony Giacalone called Jimmy Hoffa. "Jimmy, it's Tony Jack. Listen, Tony Pro wants to make peace. Bury the hatchet. We're all tired of this war. Let's meet. You, me, Tony Pro. Just talk. Work it out." Jimmy was skeptical. "Where?" "Marcus Red Fox, 2 RPM, neutral ground. Just a conversation." Jimmy thought about it. He knew it could be a trap. But he also knew that if he could make peace with Tony Pro, he could neutralize the mob's opposition. He could win the 1976 election. He could take back the Teamsters. Jimmy agreed. But before he left, Jimmy did something strange. He called his son, James Jr. "Jimmy, I'm meeting Tony Jack and Tony Pro at the Red Fox. If you don't hear from me by 5 p.m., something's wrong." James Jr. was confused. "What do you mean something's wrong?" "Just trust me. If I don't call by 4 o'clock, you call the police." Jimmy hung up. He knew. Deep down, Jimmy Hoffa knew. This might be the end. 2 p.m., Jimmy arrived at the Marcus Red Fox. Nobody was there. 2:15 p.m. Jimmy called his wife. "I've been stood up." 2:30 p.m. A maroon Mercury pulled up. Jimmy recognized the driver immediately. Charles "Chucky" O'Brien. Jimmy's foster son. The kid Jimmy had raised like his own. Chucky rolled down the window. "Hey, get in, Jimmy. They're waiting for you at another spot." Jimmy hesitated. Something felt wrong. But Chucky was family. Jimmy trusted him. That trust cost Jimmy his life. Here's the official story. Jimmy got in the car. They drove him to a house. He was shot twice in the head. Body disposed. Case closed. But here's what the FBI doesn't want you to know. They're not sure that's what actually happened. In 2004, the FBI got a tip from a mob informant named Frank the Irishman Sheeran. Frank claimed he was in the car that picked up Jimmy. He said he shot Jimmy in the back of the head, said they cremated the body. The FBI investigated. DNA tests on the car. Forensic analysis. They found nothing. No blood. No evidence. Nothing. In 2013, another tip. A mobster claimed Jimmy was buried under a driveway in Detroit. The FBI dug it up. Nothing. In 2019, another tip. Jimmy was supposedly buried beneath a New Jersey pool. They drained it, excavated. Nothing. 47 years, over 200 searches, millions of dollars, and the FBI has found absolutely nothing. Here's why. Because maybe they're looking for the wrong thing. What if Jimmy Hoffa's body was never buried? What if it was destroyed so completely that there's nothing left to find? Mob insiders have whispered about 3 methods. Cremation in a mob-controlled funeral home, dissolved in acid in an industrial plant, compacted in a car at a mob-owned junkyard, and melted down. Any of these would leave zero evidence, no body, no DNA, no trace. But here's the real question. Nobody's asking, what happened to Jimmy's insurance policy? Remember those files Jimmy told his lawyer about? The documentation, the proof, the evidence that could take down the entire operation. Did those files ever exist? And if they did, where are they? Subscribe if you want to hear the theory that makes the most sense, because this will change how you see everything. 2019, a deathbed confession. Ralph Picardo, a mob associate who'd known Jimmy Hoffa, told investigators something nobody had heard before. Jimmy kept everything in a safe deposit box, not in his name, not in any name you'd recognize. He used a fake identity, and as far as I know, that box is still there, unopened, waiting. The FBI investigated. They checked every bank in Detroit, every safe deposit box registered in the 1960s and 70s. They found nothing. But here's the thing. What if Ralph was telling the truth, but the FBI searched the wrong city? Jimmy Hoffa traveled constantly. Chicago, New York, Las Vegas, Miami. He could have opened a safe deposit box anywhere. And if he used a fake identity, the FBI would never find it, ever. Think about it. Somewhere in some bank vault, there could be a box, registered under a fake name, filled with documents that could rewrite American history. Names of every politician the mob bought, every judge they owned, every election they rigged, every murder they committed. The entire criminal infrastructure of 20th century America documented in Jimmy Hoffa's handwriting. And nobody knows where it is. That's the real mystery, not where Jimmy's body is buried, but where Jimmy's secrets are hidden. Jimmy Hoffa disappeared on July 30th, 1975, declared legally dead in 1982. But here's the truth. Jimmy Hoffa won. Think about it. The mob killed him to silence him, to bury his secrets, to erase his threat. But 47 years later, Jimmy Hoffa is more famous than any mobster who killed him. Movies, books, documentaries, TV shows. His name is known by millions. And the mobsters who killed him? Most people can't even name them. Tony Provenzano died in prison in 1988. Nobody remembers him. Chucky O'Brien died in 2020. Nobody cared. Frank Fitzsimmons died in 1981. Nobody mourned him. But Jimmy became immortal. Because the greatest revenge isn't killing your enemies. It's outlasting them in the history books. And somewhere, maybe in a bank vault, maybe buried in a wall, maybe hidden in a place nobody's thought to look, Jimmy Hoffa's insurance policy is still waiting. Waiting for someone to find it. Waiting to reveal the truth. Waiting to prove that Jimmy Hoffa was right all along. He wasn't the target. He was the insurance policy. Hit that like button if you realize Jimmy Hoffa played the longest game in history, and leave a comment. Do you think the files exist? Because I believe they do. Rest in power, Jimmy Hoffa. 1913-1975, presumed. The man who knew too much. The man who became legend. the man whose last laugh is still coming.